I applied to the clinical entrepreneurship program with an idea that I started during second year of med school. I feel like I've learnt a lot about the barriers. I think I learnt a lot in terms of quantitative skills. I learnt how to code during that. Didn't really understand what venture capital was, to be honest, but it sounded interesting. So I applied and then I got it.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the More Than Medics podcast. This week, we're joined by our first medical student guest, Harvey Hill. Harvey is currently intercalating in management at the Imperial Business School and has experience in multiple fields, including entrepreneurship as an NHS clinical entrepreneur and co-founder of Derm Spectrum, within policy as a member of the BMA Student Council, within business as a venture capital fellow and investment banking intern, and finally within research, having interned in research projects at Oxford and UCLH. So join us as we share his journey and insights, and we hope you enjoy. So welcome, Harvey, to the podcast. So just before we start, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for having me, guys. I am Harvey. I'm a fourth year medical student, previously at Bristol, but intercalating in management at Imperial this year.
Amazing. And from your background, obviously we've done our research, you've kind of explored different areas within medicine. So you've explored kind of the intersects between medicine and entrepreneurship, policy, finance. With all that in mind, how would you describe what you do in one sentence?
That's a great question. I am at this stage in my life now where I feel like I'm trying to explore different areas, find out what I like. I have had some experience in kind of youth politics, kind of dabbled in entrepreneurship. I just love learning. So I always try and take opportunities that are given to me with both hands. And yeah, I'm just very grateful for all the opportunities that I've been able to take during medical school.
Nice. So what kind of area did you start off with first? So you said you've been able to dabble in some of these kind of fields.
Yeah.
Where did it all start?
Yeah, so I guess my origin story was when I was about 13. And that was my first introduction to youth politics. So it started with someone who I was close to struggled with their mental health, unfortunately. And I remember feeling like I wanted to do something about it. And I recognized that there was a real lack of resources for them in our area. So an opportunity came to stand for the youth cabinet in East Sussex, which is where I grew up. And I stood and then I was elected. It was like a democratic vote. And I had the opportunity to start working with the NHS, local councillors, on ways to improve mental health. That was the main issue that was voted for when I joined. And it was an amazing experience. It gave me an introduction to policy, to how policy influences healthcare, which was really interesting to see from such a young age. And yeah, it was an amazing experience, and I met some incredible people along the way.
Awesome, man. And you've been on the BMA Student Council, is that right? Which I guess is a slight progression to your background as a child, I guess. How have you found the BMA?
So the BMA was a really interesting experience. I was on the BMA during my third year of medical school, I believe. And it was during a very interesting time in the politics of the NHS. So during my third year, the strikes were happening. So it was interesting to see that from kind of the inside and see how they went about dealing with that, and also the other issues that they were working on at the time. So talking about digital health, which was very interesting to me, how that could be used more in medical school. And yeah, it was interesting to see what happens from the inside. I don't know how much I can say, but
Yeah, that's fine. And I guess with that sort of background, are you interested in pursuing any sort of policy work or anything in that sort of field in the future? Or?
I think for me at the moment, I'm not as interested in it as I was.
Yeah.
I think there's quite a slow rate of progression, and this is something that kind of put me off when I was in the BMA. I feel like it takes a long time in policy to get anything through. And I think that's why I've enjoyed some of the entrepreneurial stuff I've done more, because you can get things done at a much, much, much faster pace. I feel like it's interesting on the MHCO module in management at the moment, because you learn about all the like bureaucracy and the politics behind the NHS. And also through being on the NHS clinical entrepreneur program, I feel like I've learnt a lot about the barriers of trying to sell into the NHS and like get things actually done. So if anything, I think that experience put me off health policy a bit. But I do still think policy does have a huge influence on the healthcare in general, but particularly the NHS. And perhaps if you are trying to change things at a systems level, then the way to go is being involved in health policy. Depends what you're interested in.
I think that highlights something really key there, in the sense that if you hadn't actually explored the area of policy, right, you wouldn't have realized that actually it's not quite for you, and then kind of discover your love for entrepreneurship and actually that more kind of faster pace of entrepreneurship, and the fact that you can create solutions to problems much quicker compared to policy, because there's so much regulation involved. Have to get a lot of people on board agreeing with your idea, which I guess is the benefit of kind of exploring these opportunities, right? And you mentioned the clinical entrepreneurship program. So how did you find that experience? How was the application? What did you learn?
Sure. So I applied to the clinical entrepreneurship program with an idea that I started during second year of med school. And I did a innovation competition. If you're based at a med school in the Southwest, there's a competition called Learn to Innovate, which I did in second year. And during the competition, it's a year-long kind of program, and they teach you everything about entrepreneurship, from coming up with an idea and then ideating, and then you present in the final to some investors, and the winners get some money. And our idea won. And so that gave us the confidence. So it was called Derm Spectrum, and we were trying to improve skin of color dermatology representation and improve diagnosis in people with skin of color for dermatology conditions. And when we won, we were recommended to apply to the clinical entrepreneurship program. So we did. And it was the application process was a video, 2 references, and then just a bit about your idea. And I think because we did that competition, we'd done a lot of research already, so it wasn't too like arduous a process. But the program in general, I would say, if you get the opportunity to apply, definitely do. Its main value is in the network that you create, from my opinion. I think you realize the barriers of trying to create innovation in the NHS, and you also meet the people who can help you overcome the barriers, which is really interesting to have that network available to you, whether you go ahead with the idea that you come into the program with, or whether you decide to do something else, which they say is absolutely fine. You don't have to, leave with what you started with, essentially. So I would say if you get the opportunity and you're interested in innovation in healthcare, absolutely apply. It's amazing. I can give you a reference. And they also give you the opportunity to learn from leaders in different areas of innovation. So we've had some talks from some incredible speakers speaking about issues on everything from the legal issues of innovating, intellectual property, to interoperability issues in digital health innovations. It's a great program.
Nice, man. Running theme seems to be, from like the HLA as well, from some of our previous podcasts, the main benefit seems to be the networks and the people you meet, people who are sort of similar sort of position, thinking the same way. And I guess also coming up is the role of mentors and things. So it seems that having a network or having other people that can help you in your journey is one of the most valuable things. The knowledge, fine, valuable, and you can find a lot of that online, but it's sort of putting that within the frame of what you need to do contextually, and having other people there, I guess, helps a lot. So it's just
Definitely.
something I
Yeah.
think. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so Derm Spectrum, is that something that's still going? Is that something still working on?
It's something that's still going on kind of in the background. It's more a research project at the moment. I'm involved in that less at the moment. Kind of took a step back during my year in management.
I see. Okay. And just interested to know, because obviously that's technology dependent service. How did you go about getting the relevant, I guess, technology and the expertise to do that?
Yeah, sure. So we we recognized that there were some resources already out there that were trying to solve this issue, but we did a survey and we found that medical students were almost twice as confident at diagnosing skin conditions in patients with white skin compared to patients with non-white skin. So we realized that there was an issue perhaps with the resources and the way this was being taught. So we tried to break it down from the beginning, and we thought if we could redesign like a solution for this, how would we make it as effective as possible? So we're thinking about using like active recall techniques. We looked at different features of programs like Pinterest and how they have a tool that allows you to pick skin color when you're looking, for example, for makeup products. And so we kind of used all of that and we created a mock-up of it was just a pretty simple like Canva idea. And as we got more funding, we were able to hire a developer to help us develop the solution. And then we kind of iterated it over and over. And then we entered a competition with Samsung, which was a really great experience for helping to develop that further. Um, so yeah, that's kind of as far as we got. And then we came up with a lot of issues with image like regulation and things like that. So it's kind of paused at the moment.
And that's amazing, honestly, the progress that you've made. And I think it's the fact that you didn't just come up with the solution. You actually went, okay, let's actually get to the root of the problem. You assess what's already out there and also just heard from the people, like heard from your target audience, like what exactly do you need? And then from that, creating the solution, because then that will kind of lead to more success and also that iterative process to always refine it to make it better and tailored for the audience, right? And you
Exactly.
mentioned that you won some grants, like the Samsung competition. I think you were runner up for it.
Yeah.
So what's the secret to turning an idea into a winning project, from your opinion?
I think you really need to have a strong problem and you need to sell the problem, not the solution. You need to you need to really understand the problem from the user's perspective and have numbers to back that up.
Mm.
And never assume that you know the answer to the solution, because what I found during that process was you start off with one idea and then you realize that actually the biggest issue or the biggest thing that needs solving is like further along the line, or it's in a different direction completely.
Yeah, I think the original idea for more than medics actually came from the IBSC management
Yeah.
course, but it was a completely different. Well, it was slightly considerably different. It was more so focused at sort of research and linking like a market, linking med students to doctors or researchers together, so med students can do some of the hard the hard work, the number crunching, and the doctors can provide that experience and support, and together um, hopefully publish more. But our idea sort of changed as we sort of talked to different people, tried to get some advice. It changed quite a lot, I guess, into what it is
Yeah.
today, which is something I guess completely different. But it just goes to show, there were like feasibility issues with our idea before, sort of overhead costs in terms of setting up a sort of platform and things, which we weren't overly keen on. And then we realized, we're sort of more interested actually in what More Than Medics does now, and that is actually a big market for it in terms of people are interested and want to know more about all the different things they can do, but maybe there isn't a easy, accessible place to find that information. So, no, it's massively important. And you also got a little BBC feature, didn't you?
We did. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. It was,
Nice.
yeah, it was great. It was quite scary, but it was good.
Was it okay?
So I was going to actually ask one thing that you have mentioned a couple of times is about the barriers to creating solutions in the NHS. Do you mind elaborating from your experience? What are those barriers and how has that influenced how you think about entrepreneurship and creating solutions to problems?
That's a really great question. I think some barriers that I've heard about recently. So for my dissertation this year, we decided to pick our own topic and we are researching the uses of blockchain technology in health data management. So we spoke to a doctor who created a company. He actually went to Imperial as well. He created a blockchain company and tried to sell into the NHS essentially. And when he did, he faced a lot of difficulty selling it in, and he didn't really understand why, because they had, like all the analysis that proved that this was a more effective solution. He discovered that one of the owners of one of the monopoly companies in the data management had donated a very significant sum of money to the then political party in power. And that, like, the bureaucracy essentially of the NHS, and I don't know if you can call it corruption or just, that kind of vibe.
Yeah.
That makes it very difficult for some companies to enter, when I think that was based off of more the previous tendering process as well. I think it's changed it's less of a competitive process now for commissioning services and technologies as well. So I think if you were trying to sell into the NHS a product, bear some of that and like the politics in mind. Just because you have a solution that would be more effective doesn't necessarily mean you would be able to get it into the NHS. And that's why I think a lot of people who start trying to sell into the NHS will then look into other markets, because some of those barriers it seems like insurmountable when you're a smaller company.
Interesting. So I guess that's where the experience in politics that you've had can kind of play a role there, just understanding that even further.
Yeah, I think so. I also think it's important to say, though, that doesn't mean at all it's impossible. And there's been so many amazing examples of companies, especially on the clinical entrepreneur program, who have been really successful in the NHS. So maybe it's just in that particular industry, like there's a massive duopoly in terms of the health data services, shall we say.
And I just want to see, where do you see now kind of innovation, entrepreneurship, and technology evolving within the NHS for the next 10 years?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think what really excites me about innovation in medicine is I think it's difficult because you have, the major issues in healthcare and the NHS, particularly the long wait times, all the staffing issues, the outdated technology. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you have this incredibly futuristic technology that's being used in some places already. AI, drones are now being used to deliver drugs. There's even, hospitals in the metaverse, which are being used to deliver care. I think it's really an exciting time. And it's interesting to see how some of these technologies are being used side by side. I think perhaps there needs to be like some kind of middle ground for everyone to benefit as much as possible, if that makes sense.
What do you mean by everyone benefiting as much as possible?
I think it's difficult to say we really need to get this very innovative, futuristic technology into the NHS when there's so many issues that are so outdated. So perhaps they need to find a middle ground for the moment before we try and explore these. But what do you guys think? What's exciting you?
I think you've hit it bang on the nail, really. I think even in placement, what was it yesterday? you still hear the consultants cursing at the computer systems because it just stops them doing basic tasks. So I think those are the things that we need to focus on fixing first before we and it comes back to, what's the problem? What do we need? Yes, we can use some fancy AI, etc., but ultimately we should probably sort out our baseline computer systems first, and then maybe try and get the cherry on top, so to speak. But at the same time, a lot of these AI systems can be the main bulk of the cake at the same time. So,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
it's
I think
nuanced.
I think it's also interesting the aspect of funding because that also has a massive impact on where technology will go within the next 10 years too. And in order to fix some of those problems, like for example, the outdated technology, that needs funding. But then also to bring in the AI, that also needs funding. So it's kind of balancing act of where does the funding go? We don't have like an unlimited pot. So I think also that aspect's quite interesting. And also in a sense, like for example, there are issues of like waiting times and patients waiting longer to see a GP, for example. But now we have AI that can summarize the clinical notes. So it means that the GPs don't actually have to like write out the notes after the AI does it for you. That ultimately then saves time. That means that the patient can come in quicker. So I think it is just that technically then does help with the issue that we are facing in the NHS. So I think it's finding that balance between utilizing the technology that can help with some of these fundamental issues, but at the same time not relying on it too much to the point where you kind of forget about these issues and they become
Yeah.
pro.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you're right about how AI is being used to cut waiting times. I think, is it Deep
Yeah,
Medical?
yes, one of the, yeah. There's a couple out there now, actually.
Yeah. Okay. And also I think it's interesting, is it the Darcy report that spoke about the push to community and like the push to digital?
Yes.
I think it will be interesting to see how more like virtual wards and AI routing systems will be used in the community as well. So I think there's lots to be excited about.
No,
Yeah, good,
definitely.
man. I guess let's change slight tack now. You've done quite a few internships in your time. You're quite prolific, in fact. Me, I haven't done a single one. So quite interesting to me, at least, to know what. Tell me a bit more about the different things you've done and how you've been able to do it.
Sure. So in terms of internships, I've been very lucky in that I've been able to do a couple of research projects. I did my first one at Oxford in the Big Data Institute. So I think that's why I'm really interested in health data now, because I got to see how. So I was working with the UK Biobank, which is the largest UK data set, and I was coding some of their data to understand interactions between different variables. That was an amazing opportunity. I got that through something called the Unique Plus program, which I think applications are open now, actually. So I'd highly recommend anyone who gets the opportunity to apply to do so. There's a few eligibility criteria, but it's on my LinkedIn for anyone listening. And I'm sure I can give you guys the link as well to share. That was and it's a paid opportunity as well. So it's very good.
Okay.
The second one I did was at UCLH. So that was I did a qualitative research paper on electronic health records and how radiology results are being received through electronic health records and some of the barriers that are affecting how easily those results are received, essentially. And that was an 8-week paid internship as well. That was through something called Into Research with 2 as the number, which I can also, I think, I don't know if applications are closed, but I can share that with you guys as well.
Okay, awesome. And is that for the Oxford internships? Do they do lots of different internships at Oxford? Actually, I'm not aware. And they're
Yeah.
accessible to just everyone, or?
So the Unique Plus one, I think there's 100. When I did it, there was like 112
Yeah.
different internships.
Oh, wow.
Pretty much every subject you could imagine. Quite a lot of them were medical.
Okay.
There's a number of medical students in my cohort. It's the eligibility requirements are if you're from like a widening participation background. So if that's you, then would highly recommend applying.
That's
Okay.
amazing. And what kind of were the key learnings from those research internship experiences for you?
For me, there was a few. One of the main ones was actually getting the opportunity to get paid to use my brain. It sounds ridiculous, but it was the first time in my life where someone had paid me to like I've had a lot of jobs in my life. And
Mm.
I was like, okay, wow, I really don't want to go back to doing another hospitality job after this. I think that gave me motivation to like apply to more internships. I think I learned a lot in terms of quantitative skills. So I learned how to code during that, which was really great. Learned just about working with a team. So I was working with PhD students and a supervisor. And it also made me really interested in the health data space because I was working in the Big Data Institute. It's a very well funded institute. And it kind of made me realize how big the health data market was once I did more research into it. So yeah, I think those were my main learnings from that.
Nice. And how has that influenced what you want to do in the future, or has it at all?
Yeah, I think it's made me more interested in especially the health data side. I think it's a very interesting time at the moment with the federated data platform coming in soon and the implications of what that could be for new systems and like APIs which could come into the NHS and kind of link data together. It will improve research hypothetically as well. Should be easier to extract data from the NHS, which at the moment is quite difficult.
Yeah.
I think just opening my eyes to that kind of more digital health space as well. It's made me realize kind of the opportunities outside of clinical medicine as well.
Mm. And I guess research is the fundamental for anything to be implemented ultimately, whether you consider it within the digital health realm, whether you consider it, for example, in terms of technology, whether you consider it in terms of treatments, right?
Yeah,
And medications we give. Research kind of is the foundation to, or research is the foundation to entrepreneurship. We really link it back. So I think developing those key skills, especially as a medical student, is so useful. Even if you don't want to kind of pursue actively research, within your clinical career, it's going to make an impact on whatever kind of discipline you do. And I think there's not as much emphasis sometimes on it during the medical school curriculum, or the way they teach it is not as application based as it could be. They'll teach you the skills, but they don't actually make you apply it into practice, which is what these internships then do.
definitely. And I think my perception of research before that opportunity was I never had a desire to do research. I thought it would be really boring. To be honest, I just applied because it was a paid, like it was either that or just another job.
Mm.
So yeah, I would definitely recommend doing research if you do get the opportunity. It's very
And
fun.
one thing to add as well, what I was hearing was the fact about value for time. Like the
Yeah.
fact that you were paid to do the opportunity probably not only made you really make the most of it further, but it made you feel valuable.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because I think that's
Yeah,
something that's kind of not appreciated enough. Like as med students, we'll take up these opportunities, but it takes time, right? It takes a lot of effort.
yeah,
And by, getting that small bit of payment or by doing something extra to showcase that appreciation, can really make that difference and make you even more than excited to continue on exploring that passion within that area.
definitely. I would really recommend. I think it's really difficult when you're I mean, university in general, but also at medical school. There's a lot of things that I've wanted to do, and it's like you could do it as an unpaid opportunity, but then I feel like you could do so many unpaid things, and then after a while, it's like, you know, I think there should be more paid opportunities. I think there are becoming more now, um, because time is money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and the point you made, Yaz, about research being at the crux of it, I haven't actually thought about it, but you're right, aren't you? Like you do need to fundamentally understand what's going on in any sector in order to sort of provide impact or innovate. And I guess the same for venture capital. You did an internship in venture capital, is that right? I guess, yeah. Tell me actually, what did you get up to?
So that was a fellowship actually. So that was
Uh-huh.
an unpaid opportunity. That that was I wanted. So I did a different internship in spring in it was like an investment banking insight internship. And I really enjoyed learning about that area. And it was like my first real introduction to finance. So when I saw this on LinkedIn, I really had like I didn't really understand what venture capital was, to be honest, but it sounded interesting. So I applied and then I got it. And it was just a number of talks. I think it was 7 weeks from different venture capitalists telling us about the venture capital life cycle. So the different series of funding for companies, seed, series A, series B, talking to us about how they got into their career. I think it's a very inaccessible career, at least it's perceived to be. I think it is in terms of competition ratio as well. But I really believe in, and I don't know if you guys remember this from OB, but there was a reading that was talking about the different stages of, believing you can do something. And one of them is like doing it yourself. And then another is hearing someone else who's similar to you, who's done something. And it just makes you believe that you can do it. So it was great to hear from people who had got into venture capital who are maybe not from backgrounds that would like typically go into that industry. So I think that's like the biggest value for me. Like no one in my family is like went to university even. So to hear about people who had got into the industry gave me the confidence to apply to some more things and potentially one day might be something I'm interested in.
I think it's really important seeing kind of those role models, right? Seeing people who come from a similar background to you, may have similar characteristics to you, and seeing them in positions where you would hope to be in the future. That really gives you that motivation and that realization that actually, okay, despite whatever barriers you may be going through, whether it's financial, whether it's access barriers, etc. It makes you realize that you can do it. And then having them as mentors or being able to just speak to them and ask them questions allows you to then learn more about it. So then you can be put on an equal playing field to compare to your peers, right?
Exactly.
That's so important. And I just wanted to quickly add for our listeners who might not know what venture capital is, could you just summarize what it is for the listeners?
Yeah. So venture capital started, I think it was in maybe the 70s or the 80s in Silicon Valley. And it was a way of helping technology companies grow because they need such huge cash injections at the beginning. And typically, venture capital firms will have an investment thesis. So it might be in sustainable tech or in health tech or in a particular market. So one that I recently interviewed for was in B2B SaaS in Europe, which is software as a service, business to business. And they will also typically have a particular stage that they will fund companies at. So it used to be that venture capital firms would fund at, I believe it's seed stage, which is like you've had the idea and you've kind of developed, maybe you have a MVP, so a minimal viable product, but you're not anywhere near profit making. But now we're seeing more and more VCs enter at pre-seed stage. So it might even be like it's just an idea essentially, but you're backing the founders, right? If they have a lot of knowledge, maybe they've got exits from companies in a similar industry. And yeah, so it goes pre-seed to seed to series A. And as you're going further up the cycles of funding, the returns that a venture capital firm can expect become lower. So that's why they want to get in as early as possible, because they might 100x what they're investing if they're in at the pre-seed or seed stage. Whereas if they're in at series B or C, their investment is going to be a lot more diluted because there'll be other investors involved as well. So yeah, that's just a brief overview.
Yeah, how did you find that experience going into it as a medic? It's completely alien to us. And I guess, yeah, how do you find that experience and how is that useful now going forwards for you in your career? How does that intersect with your medical career going forwards, do you think?
Yeah, it's a very different world. once you kind of get the concepts, it's not too difficult to understand. There's a lot of technical terms.
Mm.
For me, I've always like the first thing that drew me to medicine. I wanted to be a doctor since I was like maybe 10 or 11. But I remember the first thing that drew me to science actually in general was how like the futuristic elements of science. And this is something I only really reflected on recently, but I think that's what puts me off clinical medicine more and draws me more to like the innovation side of medicine because I think there's not a huge amount of day-to-day interaction with like these new technologies that are in medicine. And so I hope through my minimal introduction to venture capital, it will give me a better understanding if I do kind of go down the more like health innovation route um, of, yeah, it plays a huge role in advancing innovation, I think.
And from your experience, what skills have helped you stand out in kind of the finance business sector, getting these internships, that you think will be useful for our listeners to know about?
I think that's a great question. I think it's also difficult to answer. I feel like luck partly is partly luck. I think mentors, I think I've been very lucky to have people who have helped me. And that's the people who helped me, I reached out to on LinkedIn. So to be honest, LinkedIn is great. Um, Someone called Nick Deakin, who was a medical student who went into investment banking, helped me apply to, I reached out to him on LinkedIn. He helped me apply to my first investment banking internship, just gave me tips on, you know, the industry, did a couple of practice interviews. I also applied to a mentorship program, which I can also give you guys the link for. And Stephen, my mentor on that, also helped me with one of my other interviews for an internship. So to be honest, just recognizing that actually when you start, you know nothing. And I literally knew nothing like a couple of months before I applied. But try and find people who are from like a similar background to you, maybe, who have done similar things. So going from like medicine to investment banking, and then just applying the same like strategies you use to learn in medicine to trying to learn like these new concepts. I think that's what's helped me.
Awesome, man. Great to hear your sorts of insights on all these things, and very cool to see someone, a medical student who at such an early age has done quite a few different things. And, it's good to, I think it's a good time as well. On our previous podcast with Puru, he said that, internships in the summer are so valuable because you just sort of figure out, right, I like that, I don't like that. And then maybe next summer you do something slightly different. And by the end of medical school, theoretically, you could have, explored quite a few different things because you have time outside of the crunch times in medicine to, you know, have a little explore. And so by the end of fifth or sixth year, you can have a good idea. I guess you have a good idea. I mean, myself, I haven't done too many other extra things, and it's something not that I regret, but I definitely maybe would have done if I had a few more years left in the bank. But yeah.
I feel like there's always time as well for these things. Like I had 2 years out before medical school as well. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's, you know, our careers are long. There'll be lots of opportunities. But yeah, I also think it depends on your course. I think at Bristol we're quite lucky we get very long summers. And I know that's not the
Yeah.
same everywhere. So just yeah, take what you can when you
Yeah.
can. But otherwise, I think everything will work out.
And I think also that's key what you said, like we can always make time for it, right? So, and it's also, it's a marathon, it's not a race. It's not,
Exactly.
so for example, like you highlighted, like you actually had 2 years before you got into med school. That probably 2 years gave you that ability to kind of explore areas that you're maybe thinking about exploring. So then when you get into med school, you kind of have an idea what you want to try out. There are people, for example, like Prue mentioned, didn't do any internships during his time in med school, but now he's doing excellent things within his career, as a doctor. So it doesn't matter at what point you do them. in a sense. It's just kind of learning from those experiences, hearing what people have done, so then you can figure out, okay, which is for me, and then finding
Yeah,
that best way to do it for yourself in terms of your own career, in terms of your own personal development as well.
definitely.
One last question before we end. If you could give one piece of advice to our listeners, what would it be?
I think one piece of advice would be life is very long. Be kind to yourself and also take every opportunity that comes your way, but within reason.
I love that. That is amazing. Thank you so much for your time. You're an absolute superstar of a med student. And we look forward to seeing how you progress in your journey and supporting you as one of our More Than Medics.